Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, a very good morning to you. Welcome to the Private Sector Forum, the first full day of the Private Sector Forum, which is part of the 5th United Nations Conference on the Least Developed Countries. Thank you very much for joining us here in Doha, and to all those of you watching us online from around the world, welcome. Thank you so much. This session is being live streamed, so we are excited to have people join us from all four corners of the globe and here in Doha, of course. Now, our first session this morning at the Private Sector Forum is focusing on sustainable energy. Let me introduce myself, by the way. I'm Fuli Batibo, and I'm your moderator for today's event. I hope you've had informative sessions so far at LDC5. So again, our theme this morning is achieving universal access to clean and affordable energy through partnership. Because again, partnerships is the theme of this Private Sector Forum. Ladies and gentlemen, as we know, access to affordable, reliable, sustainable, and modern energy lies at the heart of sustainable development. But nearly 500 million people in the least developed countries don't have access to electricity, and the demand for energy is projected to increase in the coming decades. In addition, the pace of progress in energy access in LDCs is uneven across regions, as well as between rural and urban areas. While LDCs in the Pacific region have made huge strides in electrification, African LDCs are facing many challenges. This is why access to sustainable energy is a top priority for the Doha Programme of Action, focusing on the crucial role of sustainable energy in achieving structural transformation in the LDCs. Ladies and gentlemen, as you'll hear during our sessions this morning, financing is an issue. It's estimated that LDCs will need anywhere between $35 and $46 billion a year to provide universal access to energy. So how do we attain that? Well, that's when the private sector comes in. This session today will highlight the power of public-private partnership for energy access and energy transition, while attempting to show the vital role that private sector can play in accelerating energy access and transition, which remains an essential partner in powering the LDCs. So we'll be hearing from a great lineup of panelists about how they think we can accelerate access to energy in LDCs, and you two here in Doha will have the opportunity to be part of this conversation, and we'll have a question and answer session at the end of the panel, during which you can share your thoughts on how you think we can improve access to energy in the least developed countries. Now, before I introduce our high-level panelists, let's please welcome our keynote speaker, Mr. Andrew Herscowitz, who's the Chief Development Officer at the U.S. International Development Finance Corporation. Please, a round of applause for our keynote speaker.
Thank you, and good morning, everyone. I'm Andrew Herscowitz. I'm the Chief Development Officer at the U.S. International Development Finance Corporation. The goal of my remarks is to actually leave you all with some really quite practical advice. I think a lot of the speeches that you'll hear over the next few days, they speak a lot in platitudes about what the high-level goals are of the Doha program, of the climate agenda, but I think the most important thing that people need to take away is really practical advice about how to implement things like how are you going to develop a vibrant power sector in a country, because really the power sector is one of the most important sectors in any country. It's what makes and breaks elections. If there's unreliable or a lack of power, governments change hands. If there's a lack of reliable power or insufficient power, you can't power industry and economic growth, which again causes governments to change hands as well. So really, I think a lot of people gloss over the importance of the power sector. And I also find that a lot of the people who work in the climate sector don't fully understand how the power sector works as well. So I wanted to share with you some general thoughts and advice about about what countries can do to make sure that they stay on that right track for rapid economic growth. The U.S. International Development Finance Corporation, DFC, was established about 3 years ago. It represents a merger between what used to be the U.S. government's Overseas Private Investment Corporation and USAID, the U.S. Agency for International Development's loan guarantee program, which many of you may be familiar with. But it also brought along new tools as well. So it's a new souped-up organization that has tools to really bring development finance to the countries that need it the most. We offer multiple tools. We offer debt, anywhere ranging from $1 million up to $1 billion per transaction. We offer loan guarantees. We offer technical assistance, political risk insurance, and we have a new equity tool as well, so we can make direct investments into companies, and I'll share some of those investments that we've made. We also have a mandatory focus on low-income and lower middle-income countries. So 72% of our transactions last year were all in low-income and lower middle-income countries. And we're structured differently than any other development finance institution or multilateral development bank in that we don't have to earn a return for a shareholder. We're financed entirely by the U.S. government, which means that we can price our transactions for impact, not for return. And that's an extremely powerful tool that we have to be able to do that. To date, DFC has about a $10 billion energy portfolio. We've got an $11 billion portfolio across all sectors in Africa. And we also have a strong commitment, not just to large-scale renewable energy grid projects, which we have years and years of experience going back to our days as OPIC, but we also have a strong commitment to looking at how do we get people access to electricity, recognizing that just because you have a grid-level power project doesn't mean that wires are running to houses, doesn't mean that people have productive use. We ran a call for applications for distributed renewable energy about a year and a half ago that got over 100 applications with $1 billion of interest. And so we're moving forward with some of those investments. Now, DFC ties into several of important U.S. government initiatives. The U.S. government, as part of the G7, is part of the Partnership for Global Infrastructure and Investment, which is really a way to look at how we, along with our other G7 partners, can use all of our tools to drive sustainable investment into countries, including in the power sector as well. Power Africa, which I was lucky enough to help run for 7 years, was launched in 2013. Another U.S. government initiative started under President Obama, which continued under President Trump and continues under President Biden. To date, has helped over 130 power projects in Africa reach financial close and has helped 165 million people get first-time access to electricity. So it's been an extremely powerful tool that we've used. And we focus not just on the on-grid, but the off-grid as well. Now, with respect to DFC, I mentioned this call for applications we did for distributed renewable energy. We also have, within the last year, provided financing for the Morova Gigaton Fund, which is providing financing for off-grid electricity. We made a $40 million investment into the Energy Entrepreneurs Growth Fund, which is focused on off-grid power. We did a $40 million investment into the African Renewable Energy Fund. And I'll get into a little bit more detail about some of these projects. We are providing political risk insurance for a solar project in Burundi that Gigawatt Global has moved forward on. And then there's the Golamati $25 million 20-megawatt solar project in Malawi, which also incorporates 5 to 10 megawatts of storage. So now I've given you all the background, all the great things we do. What I want to do now is just share some of the lessons learned, because we're really in a magical place. We've had at least 10 years of Power Africa experience and other experience. There was this great energy back around 2013 where all the different development partners are coming together and prioritizing investment in the power sector and in energy. And if we don't look back and see what worked and what didn't work, we're not going to be benefiting ourselves. But I feel actually quite optimistic that the next few years, going through 2030, are going to be quite positive. But there's been a lag, in part, particularly in Africa, in part because of the COVID pandemic, but also because of lessons learned. So let me share with what advice I would give to governments of the LDCs when it comes to doing power projects. And one is act quickly. I think there's often a reluctance to act quickly. I think there's a lot of nervousness. I think that often the development partners, including the World Bank, will come in and give a lot of advice and say, just wait, we're going to give you this advice, we're going to plan a tender, wait for that tender. And countries that have been doing this are still waiting for the power that they need. This was the idea behind Power Africa. Power Africa's idea was that we're going to take actual transactions and figure out how to get them across a finish line as quickly as possible. Because for more than 50 years, USAID and the World Bank and other development partners have been coming in and giving advice about how everything should be perfect and then the investment will come in. And it didn't. And so we have to wake up, we have to take that advice, is just move forward and act quickly. Number two, make sure that all the ministries are aligned within a government. Often one of the key constraints to the investment is what I would describe as a political will issue. You have a Ministry of Finance and Ministry of Energy that aren't aligned. So the countries that I've seen develop the most rapidly in the power sector have been those where the head of state makes sure that everybody is aligned and that everybody agrees that we're going to move forward. We can't let perfect be the enemy of the good, and I've seen perfect be the enemy of the good in many countries. In Nigeria, for example, where going back, I think it's probably 5-7 years now, there were a series of solar IPPs that were moving forward. And then the World Bank came in because of its scaling solar program, which had seen success in other countries, and saw low solar prices and told the government, wait, don't move forward on these because your prices are too high. And so that really just threw a wrench into the works, and those projects still haven't moved forward after all these years. But what happened in the interim? First of all, you can't compare the cost of delivering power in northern Nigeria to the cost of delivering power in Senegal or Zambia. But the other thing that's happened is interest rates have gone up, costs of supplies have gone up, and a lot of the countries that put these projects on hold, they're now facing rising prices, and they've lost all of those years of having operational power. They've continued to use diesel gensets, which are more expensive than power projects that might not be ideally priced, but that are functional. And then the other lesson I would say is that countries should ask for help because the development partners are tripping over themselves to provide assistance. But identify the assistance that's going to help you move things quickly. Now, what should countries not do? One is renegotiate deals. I think one of the biggest issues that I've seen in developing countries is where countries have gone forward and they've got private sector investment in there, and then they realize that maybe these deals aren't quite as good as they'd like them to be, and then they suddenly announce that they're reneging on the projects, and they want to renegotiate. That causes incredible delay. It spooks foreign investment in the country. And there's a global market, so a lot of international capital isn't looking to invest in emerging markets. And so when you make it difficult for them, they will turn away and they'll pull out. And I've seen that happen again and again. The second thing I would say is don't agonize too much over price. Price is important, but when you're talking about small projects, particularly in the least developed countries, you need to educate yourselves about what it's like to do this type of technology. So doing a 5 or a 10 megawatt solar project, even if it's not ideally priced, provides a lot of learning for the country. And so that when you do a tender, and after you've been successfully executed on a smaller project, then the prices will come down because you've successfully moved forward with the project. I've seen this happen again and again. In Senegal, for example, the government moved forward on a negotiated deal when they went and competed using the World Bank and the IFC's scaling solar program because they had an operational asset and because the government had learned what it means to implement a solar project. People came in, it was extremely competitive, and the next one that was competitively tendered was priced extremely low. So just move forward, act quickly. That goes to the point of tendering versus a negotiated deal. There are a lot of organizations, even within the U.S. government, that believe that the country should do nothing other than competitive tenders. I disagree. I think for small projects, part of learning is getting familiar with smaller projects. I'm going to give you a comparison of two countries that I've seen. A company came to me years ago that was a Power Africa partner and said, where should I go? And I said, go to Liberia. And so they went into Liberia, and they pitched a project, and then not just the World Bank, but even some US government agencies were saying, well, no, you shouldn't move forward on this. The government shouldn't move forward on this because it hasn't been competitively tendered. Well, at the same time, the company also went to Burundi. And Burundi decided to move forward. And at the time in Liberia, the point that I was making is that Liberia is struggling with power. This isn't a large project. It's less than 10 megawatts. The government needs to do its first solar project. I get it that there will be a competitive tender at some point, and they will learn from this. And I kept saying this to people, and they weren't listening to me. And just 2 weeks ago, now this is several years later, there still is not a single solar project in Liberia. Yet I was in Burundi about 2 weeks ago, and I was sitting there standing in front of a solar array that had been built in about 18 months because the government of Burundi had moved forward. It may not be priced exactly the way that they want to do it, but they've learned a tremendous amount. I was watching this project pumping power into the grid. It was some of the most reliable power that the country has. So this goes back to the point is don't let perfect be the enemy of the good and move quickly. Learn from it. Now that same company is looking at a potential expansion of their power project in Burundi, and they're going to renegotiate the price and bring it down. But the government now knows that it can work and now says we want to deliver more power more quickly. The other advice I would say is don't be a first mover. Okay? There's no reason for an LDC to be a country that's developing hydrogen power, because what happens when you're the first mover is you're paying the highest prices. Okay? It's completely against what advice that the climate agenda tells you. They say we're going to leapfrog the current technologies, do the new technologies. But the point is that there are a lot of reliable existing technologies that are out there that are priced well, that are commercially viable, that are being used in other countries. Stick with those technologies for now. I was really trying to push hard when I was Power Africa coordinator for Namibia and Botswana to scale solar in a large way because they have an incredible resource there. And then I learned that Namibia is going to be the first mover on large-scale hydrogen. And I look at them and I said, you haven't done a successful solar project yet. Why are you moving into this other technology that people talk about a lot, that hasn't proven to be commercially viable at scale globally yet, but you know that solar can work and we can make this work. So don't be the country that says, we're just going to leapfrog every other technology. I'm not saying don't take advantage of things, but you don't have to be the test case because you end up, especially if you do a 20-year power purchasing agreement, end up paying higher prices. The next piece of advice is don't assume that inexpensive is good. And so one of the points of the Partnership for Global Infrastructure and Investment is to make sure that countries have long-term, reliable, sustainable development. And when you look at what other countries bring, I remember sitting with about 3 different African energy ministers who were all talking about some financing that they were being given by the PRC for rural electrification. They were laughing about the great deal that they were getting. And one of the issues that they realized, they knew it wasn't actually a great deal. They were excited that they were going to get power delivered very, very quickly. But there was a 5-year moratorium on repayment. The interest rate was low. They said, this is great. We'll be gone by the time we have to repay. But built into the cost of that rural electrification were the requirements to use all types of other equipment, other contractors. And if you actually dig into it, it's not necessarily the best deal out there. So look for the best quality sustainability. Not saying that these projects aren't going to deliver, but don't focus just on the lowest price. Look at the long term. And finally, the advice I would say is, goes back to don't agonize over price. I think that we see in a lot of LDCs a reluctance or a resentment against foreign capital who are making high returns. Now, when you're trying to bring private equity into a country, recognize that private equity, which has a lot of money, expects a double-digit return. It expects a return. They're getting 20, 28% IRRs on projects and investments in the United States. And so to criticize foreign capital that you're trying to bring into the country because they're trying to earn money, they're not charities. They will get projects done, they will bring capital in, but they expect to make money. And it's not that they're trying to make money at the expense of the people in the developing country, but they do expect to make money. And if you want to attract that capital, you have to understand that they do expect to make a return. Otherwise, countries will continue to rely on development partners, which is good. I mean, it's good to rely on development partners, but in the long run, if you want to build a vibrant economy, you need to be able to attract international capital. So what I would leave you with is that I'm excited about the next 5 to 10 years. I think we've learned a lot. I think we've made a lot of mistakes. I've looked at the mistakes that we made as U.S. government and with Power Africa when I was running it, but what's key is how do you learn from those mistakes? How do you right the ship and keep moving forward? I think we need to act on our lessons learned, and we're excited to provide financing for projects in the LDCs. I think there's tremendous opportunity, but we need to make sure that all the LDCs are benefiting from these investments. When I first arrived at DFC, we provide a lot of financing for projects in India. I would say that in India, you're seeing 100 megawatts of new solar power being developed every week, every month. Just a massive amount of development. And then you look at the African continent, and you're struggling to find power projects that are moving forward, a continent of 50 countries. What we need to do is work together to figure out how we can keep the African continent and the African countries on that same trajectory so that by 2030, or even sooner, because it doesn't take long to develop solar power, are lighting up the continent. Thank you very much.
Chris? Thank you. Thank you very much for starting us off, Mr. Herscowitz. Thank you for your powerful message. And I'm glad you'll be joining us on our panel just shortly. So then what more can we learn from countries that have managed to accelerate access to energy over the last decade? And how can the public-private partnerships address affordability constraints and help LDCs achieve SDG 7, affordable and clean energy? Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming our high-level panelists. Ms. Gauri Singh, Deputy Director General of the International Renewable Energy Agency, IRENA. Mr. William Brent. Mr. William Brent, Chief Marketing Officer at Husk Power Systems, which is one of the world's leading rural energy services company. Also with us, Ms. Camille André-Bataille, Chief Executive Officer and co-founder of ANKA Madagascar, an impact and innovation-driven private company specialized in supporting the energy transition in rural and urban areas of Africa. Dr. Jalel Sager, co-founder and board chair of New Sun Road, an energy access technology provider. Welcome. And of course, as I said, Mr. Andrew Herscowitz, Chief Development Officer at the U.S. International Development Finance Corporation. Thank you very much to all 5 of you for joining us this morning. Andrew made a very important speech earlier, and I wanted to start with you, Irene, from Madam Gauri Singh, and talk about IRENA's mandate, which is, of course, to promote the widespread and sustainable use of renewable energy. And it's also been tracking progress towards SDG 7. Financing, as we heard, is a key issue. So talk to us about the current financing gap for energy transition in LDCs.
Thank you so much, and thank you for having me at this forum. And I must say that this was a great keynote because some of the, the lessons and the advice is very, very practical, and we need to actually move in this space with practical advice. And the high-level rhetoric has its place, but if we have to get things done, then it has to be very, very practical moving forward. So at IRENA, as you know, we have a membership of 169 countries, so a nearly universal membership. And we work with our counterparts in the ministries of energy. And we have this annual assembly which brings these ministers of energy who talk about what they're doing in their countries. And LDC has always been a very important focus for IRENA, and we work with the the countries, and in the last decade, it was all about getting the business case for renewables and to be able to showcase the socioeconomic benefits of renewables working with these countries. But now, in this decade, it's a completely different context, because the business case is established, the renewables are definitely the cheapest moving forward. So, just to give you a global context, we did see a record high in terms of investments that went into energy transition technologies of just over 1 trillion. But if we are looking at a 1.5 degree scenario, then we really need to be looking at quadrupling it. So it's a long way forward. But that's at the global level. But if you're really looking at what's happening in the LDCs and how much flows are financial flows are going to the LDCs, then it's not a very pretty picture, because it's if I look at emerging countries and developing countries, then it's just about 15% of the financial flows going into it. And this is a sector which is very different from the conventional energy, where a lot of it came from the public sector. Here in the renewable energy space, we are looking at about 70% coming from the private sector, which means that there has to be a good mix of how the public sector can catalyze and attract private sector investment into the country for taking these projects forward. And but then, statistics also hide many things. So if you're looking at 15% not being too much, if we go and look at what happened in Africa, then it just attracted about 2% of this.
Why
over a decade.
Is that, do you think? Why is it not attracting?
I think, Andrew mentioned some of the reasons. This is solar and wind are no more seen as technology risks by banking institutions, because they're mature. There are developers who can do it. We often talk about enabling frameworks and how you procure, but I think you're also looking at this fact that the markets are not that big, which means that, I really agree with the point that Andrew was saying, that sometimes when you think that you want to do a tender might make sense if you are looking at, say, 1,000 megawatts coming in. But if you're looking for 5, 10, 100 megawatts, then maybe that's not the best way of doing the procurement. So I think the real issue really drills down to not having just an enabling framework, but to actually see what is practical and move forward with it. Because these are projects that take between 18 months to 24 months to start getting operationalized. So I think there's a lot to be said on how do you actually implement your policies that are in place in a practical way to move forward.
All right, very interesting. Let me come to you, William Brent, and Husk Power Systems, which I know wants to accelerate partnerships to expedite the achievement of universal electrification in LDCs. And I know you have a call and a message to governments in African countries.
Thanks. Yes, we do. And I want to start by just acknowledging Andy. I think, Husk Power was actually part of the Power Africa launch in 2013. And you've been a great champion of the decentralized renewable energy sector all along, and just want to recognize you and the work that you're doing. And I also want to emphasize the point that you made, and then I think Gauri also, about the need for speed. And doing things on an accelerated timeline. We all know where we are in terms of achieving SDG 7. We are far away from that goal, and we need to have radical scale on an accelerated timeline to actually do what we're talking about doing. And that's going to require partnership, in particular public-private partnership. Husk Power is the leading mini-grid company across Asia and Africa. We have the largest fleet of mini-grids that are owned and operated by any particular company. We started in India, we're in Tanzania and Nigeria, and we're looking to expand into other markets. Last year, maybe just as background, we signed a UN Energy Compact to try and demonstrate more ambition from the private sector mini-grid companies, where we committed to building at least 5,000 mini-grids by 2030. That's going to impact, millions of lives, thousands of businesses, and we're well on our way to achieving that goal. Mm-hmm. Last month, we announced that we've surpassed 200 mini-grids, and we expect to double that number within the next 12 months to 400 mini-grids. But that's still not enough, right? That's not even close to enough. And so today, what we've done is taking that a step further. And what we're doing is issuing a call to governments in least developed countries in Sub-Saharan Africa, mm-hmm. For expressions of interest to partner directly with us. And again, Andy, to your point, right? There's no need to go through complicated tender processes when you've got companies that are ready to scale today that you can partner with. So what we've said in this announcement is that we're essentially willing to commit to build 200 mini-grids in a given country in partnership with the government from that country. And we think that, obviously there's a range of what that impact could lead to, but in one country, what we're estimating is that, 200 mini-grids would benefit up to 1 million people, mm-hmm. power 10,000 small businesses, hundreds of schools and health clinics, and avoid 15,000 tons of carbon by displacing diesel generation. This is a huge opportunity. It's a huge need. I looked at some of the statistics on LDC in Sub-Saharan Africa before coming. In the 33 LDCs in Africa, the electrification rate is only 36%. So huge gap. For rural areas in LDCs, the number of newly connected customers each year between now and 2030 needs to go from 13 million mm-hmm. to 41 million. Right, so speed, and let's partner directly. I think that's the main takeaway that I'd like to leave with the audience, right. And we're ready to go.
I hope there are government representatives here who can hear your message and are ready to partner with you as well. Just before I move on to Camille, what is the value of this partnership? How much is Husk Power putting into this?
Yeah, great question. I think it's going to vary depending on the country, but what we're estimating is that we would need to mobilize about $40 million to build 200 mini-grids in one country.
Yeah, 200 mini-grids in one country. That's awesome. That's really great. Camille, let me come to you and ask you about ANKA Madagascar. Yeah, there you are. Perfect. Your microphone.
I wasn't sure it was working. Yeah, thank you.
Talk to us about ANKA Madagascar, Camille. It's 50% women, a 50% women-led business, I understand. Initially, when you founded it anyway. Talk to us about your business model and how you're helping people.
Well, that's a very, thank you for the opportunity for me to speak, and good morning, everyone. That's a good way to start. So maybe I'll start just by introducing myself very quickly, and then what I do. So obviously I'm a woman. I'm 34 years old, and I've been living in Madagascar for the past 10 years. And I'm working in a largely male-dominated environment in one of the most fragile countries in the world to address one of the most critical challenges in the world, sustainable energy access. So I'm the CEO and founder of ANKA, and we are an impact-driven private utility company dedicated to designing, financing, building and operated hybrid solar PV-based systems for generating electricity grids and securing failing electricity grids in rural, urban, and peri-urban contexts in Africa. So we originally were established in Madagascar, but we are now growing our footprint in several Sub-Saharan African markets, including Togo, Zambia, Ethiopia, DRC, and Somalia, but with no limitation for future geographies. What we are is what we call a CNI developer and a mini-grids private utility. So William and I are friendly competitors in that in that sector, and I think that this is exactly what we should be doing and being. Meaning so that we develop, finance, build, and operate systems to generate and distribute reliable, sustainable, and affordable electricity to end customers, and especially in remote and off-grid environments. So for the past almost 8 years, we've been delivering this clean energy to thousands of end customers in various environments. And we've always had this ambition to leverage on renewable energy access to build resilient ecosystems. So we try as ANKA to position ourselves at the junction between existing sectoral silos and try to include and build nexuses and include energy access with agribusiness, water supply, e-cooking, e-mobility, and services. And I guess that's our main ambition, is to try to move the off-grid energy sector from selling rural electrons to creating rural wealth. And I hope that this is what will help achieving.
Just before I come to the next speaker, explain to us a little bit more. Obviously, you're touching different fields here. And as we talk about partnership during this private sector forum, who do you partner with, and where is your funding coming from?
Well, funding is a very key aspect of what we're doing. I think that what William mentioned about partnership and involving the public sector is also another very key aspect, but I'm not going to repeat what he said perfectly. I think that what I want to emphasize now is the need for financing and the need for coordinated financing and integrated instruments. Obviously, we rely on blended finance to deliver a pipeline of projects at scale. That means subsidy, debt, and equity. Grant subsidy is a very key aspect to ensure tariff affordability for end customers, but also profitable business models for private investors. But I think that at some point we need not to think only about single instrument here and a single instrument over there, but we need to think about integrated toolbox of instruments, right, and de-risk financing to attract more private investments. So we've been working with and we've been supported by grant facilities over the years, naming the UNDP for some 1,000 projects in Madagascar and the C4all initiative through the UEF, Universal Energy Facility, as well. But I'm proud to announce that we're trying to work together in coordination with several UN agencies, naming UNCDF, UNDP, and UNIDO, through a joint SDG fund facility in Madagascar that will be focusing on 3 main components to really improve the overall market of energy access. One component is a de-risking facility to diversify the instruments to support financially the deployment of mini-grids. Second instrument is a private sector incubator to promote the private sector and to build capacity for a better market structuring. And the third component is a sovereign fund to foster the involvement of the public sector into the sustainable energy access sector.
Okay, interesting. Thank you. Thank you for your response, Camille. Jalel Sager, let me come to you and New Sun Road. Talk to us a bit more about what you do. I know you've led many innovations in the past. Can you tell us about some of these innovations and how they're being developed in the energy management space and how LDCs can access them?
Sure, thank you. I'm an academic by training, so I like to have a timer.
We have got plenty of time.
Indeed. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for being here. Energy management's not something that makes people usually get out of their seat and shout as a topic, so I'll try to give it as much color as I can and kind of talk about what it is, what it can do, and how we can come together to enable its true potential as a group. Energy management works at the intersection of what I'd say are a trio of new technologies, technologies that are maturing, that have fallen dramatically in cost over the last decade. This is solar panels, related components, cloud computing, and small single-board computers. When you put those together into a small system, a distributed power system for a remote community, what we call a microgrid, you're now competitive with the main grid in terms of price and certainly in terms of performance. In fact, it's cheaper in most cases than extending the main grid out into remote areas like you see in the LDCs where people don't have electricity and don't have internet. excuse me, this is no longer a second best solution. As I mentioned, on performance and cost, it's competitive with the main grid. And technology that our company has developed, a company I co-founded called New Sun Road, in Uganda, has now worked its way into the United States, where two of the largest utilities in California, which is our most advanced utility market in the US, use this same technology that we developed in Uganda to control their remote grids for much the same reason, that it's not cost effective anymore. And I think Andy's aware of the trouble we have with the reliability in California. It's not cost effective anymore to run transmission lines when you have these decentralized technologies available. What we'd like to do is take this technology that's run the circuit from Africa and LDCs through Latin America into the US and bring it back now to provide to the utilities and LDCs through our partners. We often work with partners. Husk is a fantastic off-grid company, but also PowerGen is one of the ones that we find has been really powerful over the years, and we've supported them as they've scaled through tens of thousands of customers. So what does it do? Energy management solves the operations and maintenance problems of sending highly trained technicians into these remote communities, which gets quite expensive quite quickly. But with remote management, you're able to actually reduce the burden of those truck rolls, we call them, through things like real-time monitoring, predictive control, and preventative maintenance. And this is about scale. It's fundamentally about scale. You can do this with hundreds, thousands, even tens of thousands of systems at once in real time on a single pane of glass, which is really what we need to get this solution out there. This is just the beginning of the scale, and it's just the beginning of what this actually enables. We heard Brad Smith here talk yesterday about energy as a fundamental baseline for the rest of the services that people in LDCs need. You want, and deserve, I should say, you want internet connectivity, you need power. You want good local health care, you need power. You want modern education, you need power. You know, we can't have energy and information apartheid in this century. You know, we heard about the changing demographics in LDCs, and we know that there's been a dream deferred with the SDGs and the commitments that we're still waiting to be delivered on. Our approach is to wrap social technology around these systems. In places like Uganda, we do something called digital community centers, which bring a lot of these stacked services to the communities, working through the communities that need to embrace these systems for them to be viable in the long term. So around the solar and the internet, you can bring healthcare, you can bring digital literacy, and we do these through women's leadership committees that actually run the systems, they maintain the systems, and they take the learnings from the skilling training that we do with the likes of Microsoft and teach them to their children and the rest of the communities. So we have 30 centers up and running in the highlands of Guatemala. We'll extend to pilots this year in Malawi and Kenya. And the most exciting thing there are new power technologies that allow us to expand these smaller, modest systems organically into the communities as demand grows. I'll finish up here just by saying, how do we do this? I'm reminded, I agree 100% with the need for speed, the need for streamlining mechanisms, whether they're finance mechanisms or government regulations. It reminds me quite a bit of the initiatives for public libraries, another topic that usually doesn't get people out of their seats screaming. 150 years ago, there was a major push for rural public libraries. It was early blended finance. It was early public-private partnership, spearheaded by Andrew Carnegie, the industrialist, one of the largest philanthropic efforts of its time. And what was done was small grants were given to seed these libraries, which were then told you have to run on your own. Thousands of them across the US, the UK, and other countries. And this lifted millions out of rural poverty and into the world of information, including my own mother. So, you know, we have an opportunity to do this now with small-scale energy internet systems in hundreds of thousands of communities around the world. We have the tools, we have the finance. What we need to do, and we can do this for less than the price of a pickup truck in every community, right? A little bit of internet, a little bit of power, and you build from that. $10 billion all in, you get a lot done. Most of the communities can be done for that. So what we need is clever blended finance. We need corporate and philanthropic money.
Right.
We need long-term, low-interest loans that our multilateral agencies know how to do. And we need comfort for investors, the equity partners who can come in and the ones who have patient capital and can see that this is where real growth exists, as we heard Strive talk about yesterday. This is where real growth will come. With this and with flexible regulation from rural electrification agencies.
Exactly.
Enabling this is key.
And I do want to address the issue of regulation a little bit more later. But Andrew, I wanted to come to you first. I know you've covered a lot of ground in your keynote speech, but I do want to hear a bit more about some of the what you think are some of the best practices and examples of rural electrification financing needs that have worked well to bring in the private sector.
So one of the challenges that we face, and I tell people that they gloss over the most important change when we went from becoming OPIC to DFC. OPIC was a self-sustaining agency. We didn't have much of an appropriation from the U.S. Congress. We gave loans, and then the interest from those loans and the fees that were charged on those loans helped sustain the agency, and we give more loans. That's basically how every development finance institution is run right now. They have shareholders. They have to make money. It's completely the wrong model. Okay? What DFC does is we get an appropriation. There's an acknowledgement that from the start that our projects can be blended in a way. I think one of the things that you often hear from LDCs, African countries, during the COP, one of the most poignant points that was made that I heard from someone was an African stood up and said, all of these announcements are great, but they're all in the wrong currency. There has to be this acknowledgement that the public sector organizations like DFC, like the IFC, the World Bank, all of the other DFIs, that making money is not that important for us. We have to think about whether financing that's blended in some way is better than grants. So rather than comparing ourselves to commercial banks or trying to be like commercial banks, we play this role in between. We have to recognize that if you want to finance a power project for 20 years in a country with a highly volatile currency, it's okay to finance that in local currency and going into it knowing that you may only make a 50% rate of, only earn back 50% of your original loan based on the anticipated currency depreciation. It's better than grant funding the project. So we have to think through, like going into it, price the projects for the impact. And often what you do in the rural space, and so we ran our call for applications for distributed renewable energy internally at our agency, people are saying, well, these projects, none of these are bankable, none of them are commercial, they should just be grants. And they can't be grants forever. We need to figure out how to wean companies off of grants. And when you look at rural electrification projects globally, I was just with the head of the National Rural Electrification Cooperative Association, International. NRECA, it's the largest U.S. utility. 90% of the rural counties in the United States are members of NRECA going back 100 years. But since the 1960s, they've been doing rural electrification projects globally. And he was telling me that when they look back at Bangladesh and other countries, it was 7 to 10 years before these projects earned a profit. So when we talk about using the technologies that Husk Power and ANKA have, we can't expect that they're going to be making money on year one, on year two. It may be 5 or 10 years, but what happens is as you give people in rural areas access to productive electricity, not just a light bulb or a lantern, but productive electricity where they can, run a sawmill or run grain mills or anything like that, incomes rise, people are able to pay for the power, and this is a long-term investment. It's like the libraries. Like, you invest early. You have philanthropic capital. You've got public capital in there. As incomes rise because people have productive use of electricity, this is going to be self-sustaining. It's not the same as a grant. You need some grants to just de-risk things, but you need to get them used to the financing.
Okay. I'll ask you, Gauri, about what you think are some of the new and innovative financing models in a second, but I know you wanted to add something.
Just to mention, I think Nigeria is an interesting example. It's a market that we're in. It's not an LDC, but it's not long from being one. And it's an example where the World Bank and the government there developed the Nigeria electrification project. Big component of that is a performance-based grant, a results-based financing mechanism that gives a grant to mini-grid developers like Husk for every connection that we can get, that we can verify. And that was only started less than 4 years ago, I think, when there was essentially no mini-grid market. There were very few, if any, private sector developers in the market. Today there are at least 15. And there are hundreds of mini-grids that have been built. Husk Power would have gone into Nigeria whether there was a grant or not. In this instance, because there is a performance-based grant, we're actually profitable in Nigeria after 3 years. So that shortened our payback period by about 2 to 3 years. Otherwise, we would have been profitable in 5 to 7. So that really had an impact in terms of accelerating the market, driving players to come into the market, attracting additional funding. Now there are other mechanisms that are coming in as well from a financing perspective. So it's on its way. Is it perfect? No, but you know, it's just a good example, I think, of achieving the intent through a mix of incentives to get private and public sector to work together.
All right, very interesting. Gauri, your thoughts about this? Andrew talked about how it's important to pay attention to the financing models. So which new and innovative financing models for the promotion of renewable energy for rural productive uses in agriculture do you think would work best in LDCs, if you look at agriculture in particular?
So, you know, we just finished doing a study in Rwanda and Uganda on what it costs to the farmer to buy a solar pump. What are the kind of rates of interest? And the rates of interest vary from between 36% to 44%. And there is a payback which is expected in less than 15 months. So what it really means is that there's actually no incentive for a farmer to go for a solar pump, which is, you know, pretty much a productive use of a decentralized application of energy like solar. And it makes absolute sense to get the farmers to move away from diesel and go into it. But it's just that you have at present a financial system that just doesn't provide the incentives for this switch to happen. And so one of the things that IRENA is working with is, IRENA, as you know, is not an implementing agency, but we're much more like a facilitation entity. So just last year, we had closed a consortium and brought together funds of $1 billion for energy transition lending to developing countries. But they were, you know, that's much more for utility scale projects. What we are now trying to mobilize is funding which can go as programmatic support to countries. Especially when you're talking about agriculture, you can't be talking about, you know, standalone small projects. You can, of course, be talking about mini-grids, which has a geographic spread. But if you're looking at, you know, maybe doing solarization of health centers at scale in a country, or you're looking at agriculture shifts to happen towards renewable energy, then you really need to be looking at a programmatic support which can go into the country and can work with local banks, with local entrepreneurs. It cannot be, you know, like a top-down model, but it has to be, you know, pretty much organic in the way it shapes up. And I think, you know, we talk about blended finance, and, you know, that's the normal thing that we'll always say, that there's not enough blended finance going, there's grants that goes, or there's you know, direct commercial capital that will go into the LDCs, but not enough blended finance. But then, you know, for blended finance, you also need receptacles in the country that will be able to handle this and mobilize it. And I really liked what Andrew said about DFC being that kind of a receptacle, because not each LDC can hope to, you know, have these kind of structures in place. So I think aggregation is necessary to bring in the blended finance to the LDCs, and that need not necessarily happen at every country, but it can get aggregated with financial institutions which are more global in their scope. So, but essentially, I think unless we can work with the LDCs, with ministries of energy, with ministries of agriculture to get programmatic support in, that kind of shift that we're hoping to see in the agriculture space won't really happen.
Interesting. Camille, perhaps you want to touch on this a bit and tell us about your experience in Madagascar. Are you using this blended finance system that Gauri talked about, or is the experience different on the ground because the structures aren't in place, perhaps?
Yeah, I mean, blended finance, as I said, is at the very basis and foundation of everything that we're doing in minigrids. I know that there are different models, whether you rely a little bit or a lot on grants to de-risk the investments and bring this little kickstart for the pipeline of projects to go at scale. Well, I guess that in very fragile markets such as Madagascar, but others that we're targeting at the moment, grant is a very key aspect, and I'm going to talk a little bit about the other two because they are very important. But ultimately, in our line of work, what we're trying to achieve is affordable electricity for low purchasing power and customers. Obviously, at some point, the tariff needs to be set at the right, level. But what is the right level? Like, what is this, soft spot that we have to figure out and agree all together to be able to, at some point, agree on the amount of subsidy and the level of subsidy that would be needed in the blended finance scheme. We can talk about 20%, 50%, 70%. What's the right amount? But that really depends on, the target that we are setting when it comes to tariff setting. What will be the LCOE, the levelized cost of electricity in all of those models? We have to remind ourselves that in Western countries and in developed countries, electricity is pretty affordable and cheap. So I know that in our industry, in our business, in our line of work, we're talking about an average of 40-cent dollar per kilowatt hour, maybe a little bit less, and we're targeting maybe 20-cent dollar per kilowatt hour. But who says that this is affordable for this population? So that is, to me, where grants is massively needed to not only the risk, but also, support the achievement of this real affordable tariff that we have to all agree on. It's not only the private sector that needs to, set up this tariff and say, hey, this is what we can achieve and this is what is good. All the institutions, DFIs, venture capitals, equity providers, lenders, and the public sector need to agree on these targets, because there's no way that we're going to achieve SDG 7 and bring affordable, reliable, sustainable electricity to millions and millions of end customers before, I don't know, 2030 or more. This is not possible. And I think that, again, this subsidy, while being very much needed to support the affordability of the service, also is very key to de-risk the commitment and the confidence of private investors. We cannot move forward without those private investment. And I agree with what Andrew said about, we don't need 100% grant funding. I think that this is completely, out of the topic, out of the mind. We're not looking for 100% grant. We need to bring a little bit more profitability and long-term sustainability by revolving, our capacity to finance those projects. And that means bringing debt and equity.
Long-term sustainability, which is also what Jalel talked about earlier.
Can I just build on something? When you talk about providing grants to these off-grid companies, it's not a lot of money. Governments provide massive subsidies every single day for the cost of electricity. In every country where the tariff is not cost reflective, which is pretty much every LDC, that's a government subsidy for grid power, which is costing millions and millions of dollars that the governments are paying. But God forbid, a small, distributed renewable energy system gets a little bit of a grant. Oh, well, it's not sustainable. What are you talking about with the entire power grid in most countries? Every country where they've got subsidies for gas, you know, countries are hemorrhaging money because they can't have a cost-reflective tariff. They can't make that decision politically, but people scoff at the idea of trying to, you know, finance renewable energy through distributed systems.
I have to come in for 1 second.
Okay, go ahead, and then Jalel can come in.
So the other thing there is that we're not just providing electrons, as you said, right? We're also providing a huge number of services that state-run utilities do not provide. So the value that we're bringing to these communities is exponentially greater than just providing electrons. So the value for money that the government gets from supporting us is much greater than they get from supporting a state-run enterprise, because we're generating demand. You know, we're providing appliance sales and financing that utilities don't do, right? So the value for money argument isn't made enough, but it's also really, really important.
So how do you make that argument better than to governments? Maybe Jalel can answer that. How do you make that argument to governments that they need to step in?
Well, you know, I wish I knew, because I would be in a different position. But, you know, we have the luxury of, our business model is mostly based on technology sales to companies that have to figure these things out in local markets. But when we do our own projects, picking up what Camille said, you know, we think about gradients of projects, and we think about them becoming more financially sustainable over time. I mean, I completely agree with Andrew in terms of the fact that it's far-fetched to think that these communities that are unelectrified should pay full freight for their own electrification. But the way we think about it is that grant funding for the CapEx portion of projects early on allows you to develop services, productive services, and start to value stack on these systems, which is what the technology enables. You can provide internet, you can do internet cafes, you can do these milling and heavier sort of light industrial activities. There's a whole set of things you can do that bring investment into these communities, which is what's really needed to jumpstart these the livelihoods in the local communities, which is going to be what accelerates them into sustainability with regards to their local electricity system. So, you know, you have a first loss fund or some sort of subsidy up front that the public authority provides, or whether it's philanthropic or something like that. And then as communities grow, you have some that will overperform, and we see this in Guatemala. We have some communities with these power systems that are making profits already. We've taught entrepreneurial skills. There's new activities happening. People are selling internet and power to one another. There's others that aren't there yet. Over time, we hope they're all run rate sustainable, and then you can bring in the debt as you start to lower the risk, the long-term debt that can really make this fully sustainable.
All right. Before I bring in our lead discussants, because we have lead discussants who've been listening in and want to share their thoughts and have questions perhaps for you as well. Gauri, I just want to get your final thought perhaps on this question of grants, that they're needed massively, and how do you get governments on board with that?
No, I couldn't agree more, because you know there are risks, perceived or otherwise, that need to be actually mitigated before you get private sector capital in, and grants which are also patient capital, which can actually be a very good source of creating that kind of blended finance that is really needed for transforming the agriculture sector or the health sector, which does need much more of grant than commercial capital. So I definitely think that's really the way to go.
All right. Thank you very much. Thank you to all five of you for a great discussion. Lots to be discussed further, I think, and I've certainly learned a lot from you. We're going to hear now from our lead discussants for this session on sustainable energy, and I'd like to call on first Mr. Michael Kogler from Nedamco, CEO of Nedamco. Michael.
Hi.
Hi.
Does this work? It does.
Yes.
Hi, good morning.
So my question, Michael, is I know that you're already investing in sustainable energy in LDCs. Tell us more about what you look for in an investment and what barriers you may have, what obstacles you may see in investing in LDCs.
Right, thank you. Thank you for having me in the first place and try to answer the question. Thank you very much for the very, very interesting discussion which hit a lot of things spot on we work with every day. So let me take 2 seconds of the valuable time of everybody to maybe explain what we do, because I guess you never heard of Nadamco before. So I'm kind of sitting here with 2 hats today. I'm having a head of Nadamco Capital, which is a private family investment firm from the Netherlands, and I'm also CEO of Nadamco Africa, which is more of the go-do part of the company, which I like. And what do? I mean, we invest, we focus on impact investments in climate tech. And these are three big words we hear around the conference all day. So let me start with the word investments. I mean, our investments are not only money. We invest in skilling, we invest in infrastructure, we invest in digitization of countries. And of course, at the end of the day, we're an investment company, but we have a 10 to 15 years time frame to get a return on our investment. So we have a long-term view on what we want to do in Africa. Impact is an interesting one. I mean, what is impact? Everybody talks about impact. But for me, impact only becomes tangible if you measure it, which brings me to what the core of our business is. We basically go into countries and we look at cities, countries, where we create digital twins. And just to understand for everybody what a digital twin is in 2 seconds, it's kind of a digital representation of something real. So for example, an electricity network of a country. We create a digital twin which kind of monitors this network. A water system for a city like Addis Ababa. We create a digital twin end-to-end, measuring all the water going through the city, seeing where things go wrong, and we can act on these. And what do we do with those digital twins? We use them, and we have them for waste, we have them for sustainable agriculture, we have them for biomass. So we're working very closely with countries. And what we do with the digital twins, we try to improve, for example, on electricity, access to electricity. We use geothermal energy, leveraging the digital twins to kind of give back energy to the grid. And by doing so, we are able to create environmental credits. And I know this is a very hot topic everywhere in the world, but there's a lot of issues around credits, as you know, for biomass, that there falls, or people are not doing the right things, or selling trees multiple times, or with water. What we do, because we're digital, it's measurable. Fully measurable. So you can't fool around with it. We store everything we do on blockchain, allowing us to create 100% reliable, verifiable certificates for water, like water restoration certificates, renewable energy certificates, carbon certificates. And what we're doing, this whole chain of things, we allow the governments of LDC countries to kind of sell those certificates using digital technology, what's happening in their country, improving the climate, improving water, improving electricity in their countries to generate forex. Sorry for the long story, but I just wanted to set the scene a bit what we do. I hope this landed. So what are the barriers? And I was actually looking at the LDC5 sign here. I mean, I see private sector, I see public sector, there's probably other sectors I haven't heard from yet. But I think it's time to stop talking about sectors. I think it's time to talk about ecosystems. And that embodies kind of what we do as Nadamco. We work in an ecosystem. We don't care it's a government or an NGO or a commercial company. So what we do to achieve what we try to do with the digital twins, we bring together companies like a Microsoft, a Bentley, who partner closely with them. We work with NGOs like the Dutch Foreign Government. We work with GIZ, World Bank. We work with many others. And we work with governments like the government of Ethiopia, government of Rwanda, to achieve those kind of things. And this kind of answers the question, in my view, a bit, what are the barriers? We often bump into a very fragmented, siloed thinking in an NGO, in a government, and even in companies. You know, this is my department, it's not my department, it's not my department, I'm not interested. And the magic lies in bringing the ecosystem together. So what we try to find are places, and we're very active in Ethiopia, for example, where the government really gets this, work cross-department, works cross-NGO to do the skilling, because all the skilling we do is being done locally. All the digital twins we implement are being implemented by locally skilled people. There's nobody from outside on my work. Sorry, this is my apologies. We do everything with local people, by local people. We have them design it, implement it, and operate it. That's one part, so the skilling. Then the government comes in and says, okay, fine, we have to kind of make this work in a city or at the country level. And then you bump into different departments again, where different NGOs say, yeah, we only focus on this part, we focus on that part. So long story short, stop thinking silos, think ecosystems. And I think that's the only way to success, to really have impact on the longer term.
Thank you very much, Michael, for that. Would one of you want to comment on that? I mean, he makes a great point, I think. We keep talking about sectors, and we need to be thinking about ecosystems. Camille, go ahead, please.
Well, obviously, I was talking about silos and ecosystem earlier in my introduction, so I can only agree with what just said. I guess that now I want to see actions and I want to see proofs, because I've been told about deconstructing silos and building ecosystems, but I don't see it on the ground. Like, we're trying to do it, and anytime we do it, we also a little bit pushed back in the corner, like, yeah, but we do finance energy, or we do finance agriculture, or we do finance water supply and
right. But how do we change that mindset then? How do we change that mindset?
That's a very good question. I don't know if there's a perfect answer.
Well,
Professor, perhaps.
I think it's tough inside organizations to change, because you have specialization within organizations, which makes it a tough nut to crack. But I absolutely agree with the ecosystem approach, and we use it in these digital community centers I was talking about earlier. We can't do this ourselves. We're a technology company, and we have to focus. We have our organizational function. But we have local NGO partners. We have partners like Microsoft, US funding agencies that come in, and everyone plays their own role. And you have to test this and build templates so you can slot in different partners in different projects in different geographies until you have something that's completely modular. And I think that's what's important, because if you're solving a 1,000-piece puzzle, every time you do this, it takes forever. We don't have that long.
Okay. Anyone else before I move on to the second discussant? Gauri, go ahead, please.
Having been in the government for many long years, I know how difficult it is to actually move out of the silos. But what's interesting is that all the silos seem to break when you go to the end user, which might be a community. Because at the community level or at a household level, there are no silos. So you might have different actors coming in to play different roles, but at the end, the silos do break at the community level. So I think an approach that needs to be really, it's actually a mindset shift that needs to start happening, and it's extremely difficult, and we see this because when we are trying to now talk to the department or the Ministry of Agriculture and trying to get them to talk to Ministry of Energy, it's a challenge. And I think, at some point when they see that all of them are actually all mandated to deliver to the same community, then I think, the mind shifts do happen. But it's very challenging.
Thank you very much. All right. Next to Michael is Mr. Malango Washikala, who's the co-founder and co-executive officer of Altec Group. Thank you so much for being with us. You're from the Democratic Republic of Congo, which, as we know, has one of the lowest access to electricity rates in the world. Tell us about Altec and what inspired you to set this up and what you're doing on the ground.
My name is Malango Washikala. As you said, I'm co-founder and CEO of Altec Group. Altec Group is a clean energy and a sustainable transportation company that has been operating in the DRC market for almost 8 years now. We started very small out of our experiences. We were born in energy poverty, really, and we experienced on a daily basis the negative impacts of energy poverty in terms of health, education, but also household income. These experiences, coupled with the fact that, or the realization that, we had to do it, alone, and it would have taken a lot of years for other people to realize the problem that we had in the DRC. So all of this is what pushed us to start Altec Group. As I said, started very small in Eastern DRC, and we have been able to scale the business across the country. Now we run a very huge, profitable pay-go solar company in the DRC. We operate in 22 out of the 26 provinces. DRC is huge. But you said about the problem, definitely the DRC is has one of the lowest electrification rates in the world. We are talking about a country of a population of about 100 million people, but the electrification rate here, we are talking about only 15 to 20%. So 85 million, maybe something like that, are really without access to electricity. So definitely, but again, we have built, as I said, a profitable business that has been also able to attract, in spite of the challenges and the countries that the DRC is associated with, that has also been able to attract a lot of investment. Over the last, for instance, 3 years, we have been able to attract over $35 million in the DRC. We are now close to 500,000 portfolio, customers across the DRC. And we have also started piloting sustainable transportation in 2022, and we are already running pilots in 4 cities in the DRC. And this is about electric motorcycles, but we're also doing pilots with the mining companies in terms of trying to replace some of their equipment with electric equipment. So this is the story of Altec Group, but the real question is how do we make sure that, Altec is a local company, really, local, pay-go, sustainable transportation company. The biggest challenge, I think, is how do we get, a lot of funding, a lot of finance to local companies like Altec, because you are talking about LDC and how do we get finance into LDCs, but we also should also really discuss about how do we enable a lot of local companies in these countries, and not only expect countries from, companies from other places to come and do the job of these countries. I think the LDCs themselves have to own their problems and really push. And, and this means involving the government, but also, it also means involving the local private sector, right? So these are some of the questions that we really, I think, have also need to discuss,
Would any of you like to touch on that? I mean, it's very interesting. The local companies need support very often. Yes, go ahead, please. Andrew.
So one of the other major changes when we went from being OPIC to DFC, OPIC was an agency that was designed to help mitigate the risk of U.S. companies making overseas investments. So if Marriott was building hotels, say what country can build a hotel in, we'll provide you financing. DFC's goal is to advance development and foreign policy. And we have no U.S. nexus requirement, which means that we can work with local companies like yours. Okay? And a couple of things I want to mention, and this is to be self-critical of our own agency, but because of where we are and where we can go. We set the goal when we first started to add at least 15 new clients a year over a 5-year period. After about 2 years, we've already added 200 new clients. We've been actively reaching out through the U.S. embassies to try to identify local companies that can get financing from DFC. One of the reasons we got the equity tool was there was this recognition that a lot of entrepreneurs, particularly in Africa, don't have access, they don't have the equity that they need to access the debt to grow. So the thought was if we could give entrepreneurs small amounts of equity, that they could then go out to the private markets and raise money. We're still struggling to do this because for us to give companies small amounts of equity, just the amount of work and the cost of complying with all of our requirements, all of our environmental, social, and governance, it becomes extremely cost prohibitive. So it's something we're trying to figure out how to tackle. But obviously, companies like yours are exactly the types of companies that we want to try to be providing financing for so that you can grow.
Anyone else on providing financing to these local companies? Because as we've heard there from the gentleman from the DRC, it's all good for foreign companies to come in and help, but they often want to do it themselves. How do we help them? How do we push them up?
Well, I can totally relate to that story, and I agree also with what Andrew just mentioned, all the processes and the difficulty to access those corporate funding. There's a difference between project financing and corporate financing, and my example is that for the past 8 years, and I know that this might sound strange, I know William reacted strange when I told him, but we grew for the past 8 years completely organically, and we never relied on any single corporate fundraising because it was, I think that we were kind of, a little bit scary of going through those processes, very heavy, very long, very painful, very complicated, and at the same time, I don't know if that this process goes for 20, 25, 28 months of process. This is, you know, very time consuming, obviously, but this is also very costly. So in the end, is the end goal worth the whole journey of it? And at the same time, all the work that you're putting in this is not put elsewhere, and especially in doing your job, building pipeline of projects, going at scale, and monitoring results and impact, and trying to make, you know, projects successful with viable return. So I guess that we have at some point to acknowledge that the whole journey of sustainable energy access is very promising, but very complicated at this moment, and we need facilitation, we need smooth process. I used to say, I was in a conference last week, and we discussed that as well with our peers and financiers. Basically, the answer is simple. Just give the money, let us do a job, and we'll figure it out about, you know, how to improve the instruments, the processes, and so on. At some point, we have to be bold. We have to get out of our comfort zone and just, you know, just get in the game. So we need money, we need support, we need facilitation from a regulatory perspective and public sector. We need to do it now. Otherwise, we will never reach the objective, and very ambitious objective that we'll all, you know, set up for ourselves through the SDGs. But I agree that at some point we will improve those processes.
But if you're the company,
I want to tell her a secret, though. Okay.
It will never happen.
It's worth it for you to go through that process with one of the development partners, and I'll tell you why. Everybody wants to pile on to a successful company. And so the companies that have gone through the hassle of dealing with all of our environmental, social, of sharing their audited financial statements, going through all of that, and then they get that first financing from a development finance institution or the grant from the organization, all the other ones then want to jump onto that success. You've already learned how to do it. Now, I want to compare you to, my best friend owns a coffee company that does about $40 million a year. He still doesn't have audited financial statements. He refuses to take money from any of the development finance institutions. He's like, I'm not going to deal with all that stuff. He's doing fine. His company could grow probably to $1 billion company, but he doesn't want to deal with all of us. My advice is, and
I'm going to add
you can add to this because you're going through it right now, right? Once you go through it once, then everyone else is like, oh, well, DFC provided them financing. They must be great. Some of the companies that that get financing aren't necessarily the best companies out there. They just went through the hassle of
But what Camille is saying, why go through that hassle when you can focus your energy in?
I agree. It's a challenge.
So,
that's why I gave the example of my friend whose company is doing. He's like, I'm not dealing with it.
Go ahead, William.
Because it gets back to speed and scale. You can't scale at speed without money to power that, right? However, you know, and I agree with you. It makes us.
We can give billion-dollar loans, like we can really help.
So we are becoming a better company because we're going through these processes, without doubt, right? Our investors are forcing us to do things that we wouldn't otherwise have to do, and improving how we operate as a business. I agree with that 100%. However, it takes a painful amount of time. So if you're talking about speed things up. So there's still a responsibility on the side of the investment community to speed things up, because, you know, our chairman of the board took 2 companies public in the United States, and the due diligence that we have to go through now compared to what he had to go through is far greater. And we're a growth stage company, right? Working in emerging markets where impact is supposed to be as important as financial returns, and we're being forced to go through excruciating due diligence. Now, that is just a fact, right? I want to get back to the local companies.
But I agree, and I want to get that feedback, like, honestly, because I couldn't agree with you more.
Okay. But like for local companies, I'm here as the only American, non-Asian, non-African employee of Husk Power, right? I'm only here because of my colleagues in Nigeria, Tanzania, and India who are doing the hard work on the ground. I want to make that clear. But we're still a foreign company. I think that there is what I hope is that companies like Husk, as we scale and make progress, as Andy's saying, will help to lift all boats, right? So that local companies as well can take, and there's some amazing companies locally who've come up from Nigeria, Tanzania, I respect greatly and have a great future. But I think our success will also be their success.
Great. Thank you so much. Thank you. Listen, I think we can take some questions now from the floor, perhaps. We have a roving microphone. So if any of you have questions, either for our panelists here or our lead discussants, please raise your hand and the microphone will go to you. Don't be shy, please. I know you have a question. Gentleman in the back. Oh, a few questions coming. Excellent. So let's go to the gentleman in the back with the glasses. Yes. Thank you very much. Yes, your microphone is on. Go ahead, please.
Okay.
Can you stand up so we can see you, so our panelists can see you? Thank you. And perhaps tell us your name and where you're from.
Good morning, everybody. Can I speak French, please?
Yes. Well, we don't have. There's one French speaker, so we'll put your question to her. Go ahead.
Okay.
And I'll translate the question for our other speakers.
Alors, bonjour tout le monde. Je m'appelle Mabate Sao. Je suis un représentant de ALFI au Sénégal, African Leadership Initiative. Donc, ma question, c'était, bon, je voulais poser une question et une contribution. Parce que quand on parle de transition énergétique, en Afrique, on a tendance à je ne sais pas moi, lutter contre cette transition-là. Alors que nous, chez nous, on en a besoin. Par exemple, quand on parle de l'électrification en Afrique, on est très en retard. Donc, on a besoin de ces financements-là dans certaines zones pour pouvoir un peu développer ces zones-là. Parce que tant qu'on n'a pas d'électricité, on ne peut pas utiliser les infrastructures qui vont développer cette partie-là. Par exemple, quand on prend le Sénégal, si on prend cette partie de la Casamance, où il y a, par exemple, des ressources naturelles, donc souvent, on a besoin de développer des infrastructures routières, terrestres, de l'électricité. Mais déjà, pour aller là-bas, c'est tout un problème. Et souvent, les multinationales qui sont là-bas, par exemple, si je prends le cas de Sabodala Gold, ils sont bien installés, ils s'autofinancent. Et à côté, par exemple, vous voyez des villages qui ne sont pas électrifiés. Ouais. Donc ça, c'est des problèmes. Ça, c'était une petite contribution. Et la deuxième... La question, c'est que pourquoi, en fait, vous voulez, coûte que coûte, qu'on aille vers la transition énergétique? Merci beaucoup.
Que vous fassiez quoi?
En fait, pourquoi, en fait, qu'on pense que coûte, il faut qu'on aille vers la transition énergétique?
Very, very good question. Très bonne question. So,
okay, thanks.
The speaker there is from Senegal, and he's saying that there is a fight against this energy transition in some countries like Senegal because they're having to deal with so many other issues where there's no infrastructure, there are no roads. How do you put electricity in a village where it's no access to that village? And he's asking, his last point was very important. Why do some companies and some countries absolutely want to move towards energy transition? What's in it? What's the benefit for a country like Senegal? Camille, peut-être que vous pouvez répondre. Camille, comme il a parlé en français.
I'll say something very quickly. We've seen, actually been a part of a large-scale project developed for Senegal, which was 20%, or maybe 80% grid extension and 20% microgrids for villages that were remote. Apologies, someone's going to need to translate this. What I can say is the microgrid portion of that would have reached the hardest to access areas was looked at as, I should say carefully, it was looked at as something that was being done in part for show, and the main show was the grid extension. And I think companies around the world that are leading with their technology and can see how these pieces fit together are excited to transcend the old paradigms, and they understand that there's more cost-effective and economically efficient solutions out there, which blends the best of what we want and what we can afford.
So I would add a couple of things. One, countries need to do what makes the most economic sense for them. They need to take an all-of-the-above technology approach. That includes fossil fuels, right? And I would say that, I'd say that the vast majority of people who are pushing the climate agenda, and I'm a supporter of the climate agenda, don't understand how power systems work. They think that you can swap out 100 megawatts of solar for 100 megawatts of gas. They don't know what baseload energy even means. You need to have baseload energy. The reality, though, is that renewable energies are beating other technologies based on price. And so while gas will be an important part of the transition, particularly for many countries in Africa that have gas resources, coal just really isn't competing even on price anymore. In fact, I was with my aunt about a week ago, and she was giving me a hard time because I spent 5 years living in South Africa. She said, "What's going on?" She said, "I thought you were living there and you were supposed to fix everything there. I've been reading about that South Africa is an absolute mess." And I tried to have an honest conversation. I said, "Look, the South Africans just kept their coal and they weren't maintaining it and the plants are falling offline." I said, every renewable project that we supported in South Africa moved forward, is producing reliable power, but they didn't move quickly enough. So countries, goes back to what I was saying earlier, you have to move quickly. It's like ridiculous to me how little renewable energy is moving forward in many of the African countries. The technology is there. It's not a high-risk technology. Solar is not high risk. It's political will. It's pricing. It's capacity. It's all things that we can fix together. And we need to get away from perfect being the enemy of the good. We just need to move quickly.
Okay. Anyone else? Camille, maybe.
Well, no, very quickly, I completely agree with what has been said. I guess that's energy transition, and I'll take the example of Madagascar, but I'm pretty sure this is not the only market where it happens, also means energy independence. And this has quite a huge impact on the economies, on the local economies, being dependent on importing diesel, heavy fuel oil to make work this the electricity grids. I've seen that in the country, and I think that at some point it is very important for nations to own, to keep an end on what is going on, and electricity being produced is part of it, especially when we're in countries where, the resources are pretty largely spread out and available. That makes sense to just, go for it. And obviously, climate action is something very important that we should all be focusing on at the moment.
Yeah, but it was interesting, I think, to hear the gentleman's point, because unfortunately that's the viewpoint in a lot of these LDCs. Why do we need renewable energy when we have so many other issues and challenges that we have to deal with? It was interesting, I thought, to hear his,
I think it goes to price.
Yeah.
It's the economics. That's why.
Yeah.
It makes sense.
All right. Great. Another question, perhaps. Yes, the gentleman, let's see who's closest. Yes, third row there, yes. Go ahead, please.
All right, thank you very much. Panelists, we really admire your presentations across the board in terms of the topics on the discussions. Mohamed Kamara from Liberia. Honestly, I'm from the agriculture sector, specifically rice. That have been my focus area. But you cannot do anything without sustainable energy in every sector. And in my country, that is one of the things that, is lagging behind. And the government is trying through the World Bank and West African Power Pool. But looking at, as of now, 20 to 2030, whether half of our population we have access to energy. That is one of my concerns, because in the rural area, it will be very difficult for our people to access energy. And then
What is your question?
The question is, how can energy be transferred to our people in the rural area?
How can energy be transferred to people in rural areas of Liberia, for example, where the gentleman is from?
Transferred, what does it mean exactly?
There's no electricity. There's no, how can energy be taken there to these rural areas?
Well, I guess that this is exactly what we're doing.
Talking about, exactly. It's exactly what we've been talking about all morning long.
We're not relying on grid extension. This is where the private sector comes in and provide, diverse range of solutions that can be mini-grids, nano-grids, interconnected mesh grids, or pay-as-you-go, SHS, whatever, name it. I mean, there's a wide range of solutions available, and that's what we're trying to do.
The solutions are there. Is the political will there, though, in some of these LDCs?
I think that's actually the point, that you have to prioritize providing energy access as much as, the other priorities. Because if you don't prioritize it, then it won't happen. But I think the point is that you have cost-effective solutions available. So it's not now anymore extending grid lines to kilometers and kilometers, because the way countries are normally, the habitations are in countries, you'll have a lot of population around the country's capital, but then it's pretty much dispersed. So there are solutions available for renewable energy to play an important role, and I think it's the political will, the political prioritization that needs to come in.
All right. We'll take one last question from the audience. The lady, yes. Sorry, I can't see you because of the podium. The lady in brown there. There you go.
Hi, how are you? Alex Theron, Mendulis Energy, based in Uganda. Thank you all so much for your insights in these really fascinating conversations. Something I'd love to hear a little bit more about from the panel, especially our colleague Gauri from IRENA and from Andrew, is looking a little bit more about how DFIs can support blended financing, really looking at the carbon markets as a potential solution to the issues of privatization in the renewable energy sector that Gauri highlighted at the beginning of the session. Thank you so much.
Gauri or Andrew?
I didn't catch the question completely. You said, how can DFIs support?
How can DFIs and other donors start looking at how they can support the renewable energy sector with TA specifically focused on carbon financing and looking at that as part of a blended financing package as it's becoming more and more common as a default, moving away from equity and debt solely, if that's clear.
So I think this is one of the things that the panel's been talking about really for the last hour is using that blended financing. Look, long-term sustainability is going to be debt and equity. You're never going to be commercially viable if you're living off grants for the next 20 years. But grants do play a role. Subsidies play a role. This can't be a constant. It can't be a charity, right? So you need to make sure, because then you're not going to get maintenance. There needs to be a commercial incentive for something to be successful, and it doesn't do anybody a favor if something's 100% grant finance. The role for grants is to really kind of serve as a crutch for companies that have a path to commercial viability. And that's what we were talking about with Camille. ANKA has received many, many grants, but ANKA is commercially viable, and same with Husk over years. It takes a long time for development agencies and DFIs to sort of help companies get on that path. But on the long run, we all want to work to putting ourselves out of business, and the companies are standing on their own.
Right.
But the question was also about carbon, is that right?
Carbon, yes.
Yes, I know Gauri. Carbon. So I know Gauri has comments on this as well, but Husk has been monetizing its carbon offsets for the past 6 years in India, and we'll be doing so in our markets in Africa soon as well. So if you want to have an offline conversation, let me know.
All right.
And sorry,
briefly, and then we'll take one more question because there are a few more. Just go on. Go ahead.
Okay, just very quickly about your comment. Completely agree. Just do not forget about LCOE and tariff setting. Again, like the soft spot we are targeting is very key, because there's a difference between targeting a 20-cent dollar per kilowatt hour and a 2-cent dollar per kilowatt hour. This will not be achieved only by long-term equity and debt. And again, to the other question in the carbon financing, we're also valuing our carbon credit through a very different mechanism. This is not on our own, but basically our lender is providing us with very consensual terms, long-term debt, in the exchange of them getting access to our carbon credit to sell them on the
Gauri,
markets.
on carbon financing, perhaps.
No, I just want to add that it can be a supplementary revenue line. It cannot be something that will ultimately lead to the companies or the private sector becoming commercially viable.
Okay, we'll take one last question, but a brief one. The gentleman in the back there in glasses has been raising his hand for some time now, so we'll take that last question from him. Go ahead, please.
Good morning again, and thank you for the very fruitful session. So I am from Laos, from the private sector. Just to share with you that my country is exporting 95% of its energy, mainly from hydropower to the neighboring country, the Mekong sub-region. And we consume only a few. However, many of the hydropower dam and the government is still in debt. We don't understand why we sell electricity, but a lot of debt. So my question is, how the people can benefit from this investment, and how to eradicate corruption. I think there's an ongoing restructuration, but this restructuration is not happening. It's just buying time, so and so.
The C word, the big C word, corruption.
So second question is, now we are moving from the hydropower to renewable one, like solar and wind. So we need to be careful for this new investment just happening now, how the people can benefit and not getting in debt again with this new one. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your great question. Perhaps, Jalel, you want to answer that. How do people benefit directly?
Yeah, I have a little bit of experience. I worked with Lau in the Ministry of Energy and Mines for my postdoc with USAID and a Harvard-Berkeley project. When we were looking at exactly that, how to spread the benefits from large-scale hydro that Lau was exporting to its neighbors, and sometimes directly went over villages that had no connection. And I think the answer, I'm going to completely dodge the corruption question. I think there's a panel later. It's above my pay grade. It's an endemic problem, and very little can get done without addressing it. So it's the real issue. But in terms of technical and socioeconomic development, I think the answer here is small-scale resilient systems that leverage what's being done with hydropower investment that are added on to hydropower projects. And of course, you have to be careful that those hydro projects don't destroy the livelihood of river communities that have been there for a long time. So I think you have to be careful about which hydro projects you use. But you need to use spillover benefits and use small-scale solutions to actually get power to the people in Laos.
Thank you very much. We're going to leave it there because there's another session coming in very shortly in this theater. Thank you all, to all of our panelists, for their wonderful insights. Congratulations to Husk Power Systems on its new initiative to partner with governments in Sub-Saharan Africa to scale up community solar minigrids. As we've heard, ladies and gentlemen, investing in solar, wind, and thermal power, improving energy productivity, and ensuring energy for all is vital for the LDCs to achieve SDG 7 by 2030. LDCs, as we've heard from our panelists, require unique solutions to achieve universal access to clean and affordable energy. Thank you all very much once again. The Private Sector Forum will be back in just 10 minutes with a session on agriculture and rural development, which will be moderated by my colleague Femi Oke. And I will see you back here this afternoon at 3 p.m. for another session. Have a wonderful day here at the Private Sector Forum and at LDC5. Thank you once again for joining us. Thank you. Thank you.